Wow. May be seated. Good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of Dr. Joyce Brown, President of the Fashion Institute of Technology, I welcome you here today for our keynote address for the opening of FIT's Black History Month celebration. My name is Dr. Ron Miley. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at the college, and I have this pleasure of introducing the keynote today. This year's celebration consists of many panels, movies, workshops, and a wonderful exhibit by the Black Student Union in the Arts and Design Gallery entitled Black in Time, a Black Renaissance. This exhibit celebrates the evolution of Black culture by going beyond the narrative of slavery and back to the rich heritage and culture and tradition from Africa and its expansion worldwide. Further, the exhibit showcased the work and initiatives at the Fashion Institute of Technology to create a more diverse and equitable community. This special student collaboration is one of the many highlights this month for Black History Month. For more information on these events and others, please check the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion website and that of the Black Student Union website, and also social media. This year's theme, each year there's a national theme for Black History Month. This year is the Black Vote, and that is very, very important this year, more so than ever. It's representative of decades of struggle and fighting for rights, voting rights for all Americans, first for blacks, then for women, now for all. It is not limited to understanding, it's important to understand that throughout the history, there's been limitations on and restrictions put on people for voting, from voting taxes, from owning property, and from just denying the right to vote for citizens. And it's up to each and every one of us to make sure that we are registered, that we vote, because many people have died for that right. American society, as I said, did not make it easy for African Americans or for women to vote in this country. But we have made great strides, as we've seen in this video. The one thing that we need to keep in mind is that power comes from action. And action comes from when we vote. When we're silent, people take advantage of that and take away our power. And it's up to us to make sure that they don't do that. As I said before, this year more than ever, the Black vote is crucial in making a change in this country from one of hate to one of inclusion and understanding, where we are all part of a wonderful mosaic and of a republic that values democracy, freedom, justice, and liberty. I now have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. Sometimes we need someone to keep us on track as a people. And to keep us focused on what we need to be doing. And Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz is that person. Yolanda is a professor of English education at Teachers College, and she labels herself as an interrupter, okay? Interrupting the status quo. And the Black vote in history of this country is a change agent and thus an interrupter in change. Dr. Seeley Ruiz is the founder and faculty sponsor of the Racial Literacy Roundtable series at Teachers College. She has spoken throughout the country on issues related to critical, radical empathy. And she also works at Teachers College's civic participation project, which concerns itself with the education, well-being of young people involved with juvenile justice and foster care systems in New York. Again, her other interests are in Black and Latino male students, English education, culturally relevant pedagogy, racial literacy in urban teacher education, and also the plight of African American males and women. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wish that the amphitheater was filled just to see that video that we just saw. It is both inspiring and unnerving and heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. I'm grateful to be in your presence today to talk to you about a topic that I care deeply about and only came to understand when I was in my early 20s, right, as an undergrad and as a graduate student. The lights are a little glaring, so I'm sorry about that. I am trying to look at some of you, though, right? So because schools are notorious for not teaching Black history beyond slavery, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, I didn't learn about the Harlem Renaissance. I didn't learn about some of the beauty and the struggle that was presented in that video until I was an undergraduate at NYU. And when I did, I immediately added to my English major, which was 18th century authors, mostly white authors. I now began to study the brilliance of thinkers and writers who looked like me and came from a legacy that shook the world. So I want to thank Dr. Ron Milan for inviting me here, and I thank all of you for participating in these events on your campus and paying homage to those who I call my people, but also those who have given so much to the world. And so my title for today is For the Love of Black History, From Freedom Schools to Higher Education and Beyond School Walls. So in my mind, it is befitting to talk about Black history by starting with the involuntary entry of Africans into America. So last year in 2019, America commemorated 400 years. 400 years ago, the first group of enslaved Africans arrived to Jamestown, Virginia. And last year, I began to work with one of my doctoral students, Angel Acosta, on gathering groups together to discuss the 400 years of inequality, but to engage in reconciliation and healing around this 4th century project of dehumanization. So using a timeline created by the 400-Year Commission, headed by Mindy Fullilove at the New School, we would go around the country. We still are. In fact, we're doing a healing circle tonight in a dance class at Teachers College, where we engage folks in banners 40 feet by 20 feet long. And I have followed Angel's lead and began to engage folks in schools around the country in this timeline experience. So the experience intends to help us reckon with the history of this country and deeply understand the painful nature of white supremacy and why only healing and love is the antidote to the wounds of the past and present-day history. The timeline resonates with a segment of racial literacy development that I work in my research, but specifically around historical literacy, where I argue that specifically for educators, we must develop a deep and rich contextual awareness of the historical forces that shape the communities we work in, but also the society that we live in. And so for Black people and others around the world, we pause to reflect on that history during the month of February each year. We know that Black history is American history and should be taught all year round, but will certainly take a month, over a week, which it actually started as a week with Carter G. Woodson. And that's how he proposed it. Carter G. Woodson, as many of you may know, was born December 19th, 1875, and he passed away on April 3rd, 1950. Woodson was an American historian, an author, a journalist, and founder of the Association for the Study of African American History, and also the founder of Howard University's Journal of Negro Education. He was one of the first scholars to really focus and study African American history, which is why he is dubbed the name Father of Black History. And that is Google's rendering of Carter G. Woodson in celebration of his birthday. In February 1926, Woodson launched the celebration of Negro History Week, which is the precursor to Black History Month. And oftentimes, Blacks are told slavery was over a long time ago, Why are you still talking about it? And of course, that is an absurd question. It is like asking a historian not to talk about history, or to ask a people not to talk about their ancestral past, no matter how painful. It must be remembered. It is the thread that holds us together. It is the connection from past to present, excuse me, to future. It is the way that we do not forget it's the way that we do not forget and how we remind the current and future generations of the shoulders on which they stand. And there is so much to learn about Black history. I was challenged in thinking, how do I even begin, right? To talk about the accomplishments, to talk about the agony and the beauty that comes with pausing for this type of event. There's so much to be inspired. And this is where social media can be our best friend, right? So some of the most beautiful and inspiring images, many of which I have in this presentation, were curated on social media during this time of year. And I'm just going to share a few with you. So back in 2017, during Black History Month, a Seattle mom, Christy Smith-Jones, started a project where she began posting some pictures to Twitter and Facebook of her daughter Lola dressed up as famous Black women. So for 28 days, she shared these touching photos of her 5-year-old celebrating Black women, and it became an epic photo series that was featured in Parents Magazine. So here are a few of these wonderful images. This is Lola as Harriet Tubman. Rosa Parks. It's amazing that she looks so much like her. Talk about the spirit carrying on. Toni Morrison, Queen Toni Morrison, who is now our ancestor. Dr. Mae Jemison, and Misty Copeland. So not only does this warm the heart, it's an example of why we must teach this rich, varied, and complicated history, not only to Black children, but to everyone. It is all of our history, the beauty and the resilience, the boldness and the resistance in the face of fear. From the Little Rock Nine in 1957, to Ruby Bridges in 1960, to the Freedom Schools in 1964, and to Medgar Evers' death when he tried to integrate the University of Mississippi Law School. Schools have always been the battleground for equal rights, for equity, and for rightful inclusion. So on this first video, I think I need assistance. This is a short clip. I think it is actually the trailer of the PBS series on Freedom Schools. And I would like for us to just engage in the video and see where it takes us. This is Freedom Summer.
Hear that freedom train a-comin'. Hear that freedom train a-comin'. Well, hear that freedom train a-comin'.
Spending a summer in Mississippi taught me a lot about this country. My high school social studies teacher taught me that we all have rights. Mississippi summer taught me that we didn't all have rights.
They'll be coming by the thousand.
When we began to go to Mississippi, the Black people we met there were not interested in lunch counters. They weren't interested in sitting in the front of the bus. There were no lunch counters. There were no buses. They wanted to vote.
It'll be carrying registered voters. It'll be carrying registered voters.
I just made up my mind that I was going to be a registered voter. I never wanted to be a politician. I just wanted the right to vote.
I don't want the nigger as I have known him and contacted him during my lifetime to control the making of the law that controls me, to control the government under which I live.
It'll be rolling through Mississippi.
I don't think people understand how violent Mississippi was. Terrorism led black people to the obvious conclusion. If they try and vote, they're messing with white folks' business, and they can get hurt or killed.
We hope to send into Mississippi this summer upwards of 1,000 students from all around the country who will engage in what we're calling freedom schools, community center programs, voter registration activity, and in general, a program designed to open up Mississippi to the country.
The burned-out station wagon in which the 3 civil rights workers were last seen has been processed by FBI laboratory investigators.
I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't dream for a minute that people would be killed. But it was always in the back of everybody's mind that bad things were going to happen. So it was terrifying. But if you cared about this country and you cared about democracy, then you had to go down.
I'm going down to Mississippi. Oh, I'm going down a southern road. And if you never see me again, remember that I had to go. Remember that I had to go.
Certainly Mississippi, from the Freedom Schools to Medgar Evers to Emmett Till, has taught us a lot about both justice and injustice in our country. Thank you. And these are Mississippians walking to vote. Blacks have always understood that education and the right to vote would be our way out of the oppression that faces us. So these Mississippians and other blacks across the country walked for miles for the right to vote. Their love for themselves and their love for their future generation inspired them to see their current reality, but also to imagine a brighter future. So less than a decade later, America would see Bayesian-born Brooklyn Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm as the first black woman to run for president. Chisholm was also my father's neighbor in Barbados, but that's another conversation for another day. And it is awesome that there's a statue that has been erected in her honor in Brooklyn last year. So I imagine that Shirley knew something. I imagine that those folks who walked miles to vote knew something. I imagine that Shirley knew something. I imagine that blacks and their co-conspirators knew something, because then this happened twice, right? So from fighting for the right to vote to the election of Barack Obama took on an understanding of historical literacy, resilience, and love. Love is indeed what I argue the answer to much of what we are seeing. Historical literacy, though, helps to develop a racial literacy. And racial literacy, as I define it, leads to action, and action leads to change. Change that we need in schools and change that we need in society. So these are some of the books that I have read that brought me to a level of racial literacy. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima. Again, I did not come to this knowledge until I was in my 20s. The Miseducation of the Negro, this is a perennial bestseller, over 500,000, maybe at this point 1 million copies in print. Stamped from the Beginning, a recent 2016 National Book Award winner, Ibram Kendi. It's Stamped from the Beginning, the definitive history of racist ideas in America, and then of course Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., another perennial bestseller that has had about 40 print editions. And I argue that racial literacy, specifically in teacher education, or I would argue the work that we do as professors and teachers and those who serve students, it calls for self-reflection, for a moral and political and cultural decisions about how teachers can be catalysts for societal change. First, by learning about systems of injustice, and then explicitly teaching our students what we have learned through the use, because I'm an English teacher, I use dialogue, I use collaging, clay making, critical text, and journaling, and helping our students to develop the critical thinking and conversation skills around the topics of racism, discrimination, and prejudice. And last, I argue that racial literacy asks that teachers take action against injustice in their school settings once they recognize it. And this is our history. And the problem of the 21st century has shown to be the problem of the color line as well. And this is our history. And this is our history. And so it's this. This is Bessie Mae Smith. I love this image. I just imagine what was said between Bessie and those two officers. You know, so the creative writer in me has a whole dialogue that's going on what was said. But that is our history, as is this. If you've not seen I'm Not Your Negro by Raoul Peck, who stitches together the work of James Baldwin as he writes about his three best friends, Medgar, Martin, and Malcolm. This is a poster. I invited James Baldwin's nephew, Trevor, to Teachers College and had him in conversation with a friend of mine, an associate professor of history, and we screened the documentary. So this is our history. This is also our history. The Central Park Five. I'm grateful for folks like Ava DuVernay, who has brought to our attention the criminal and justice system through 13th, but also this powerful documentary on the Central Park Five. And this is our history. This just happened last week. This was at Michigan State University. A professor had come from a jazz concert and went into the bookstore, and this is what she saw: a celebration of Black history with notable Black history folks hanging from a tree. So this type of racial insensitivity, it is said that this bookstore is known for doing these types of things. This is why it's important that history must be present always, that we have to teach about the struggle and the resilience, because racism is resilient. And this is our history. Yesterday, Trayvon would have been 25 years old, and he was killed when he was 17, carrying iced tea and Skittles as he was walking towards his father's apartment in Florida, and gunned down, followed and gunned down because of his clothing by George Zimmerman, who we all know was set free. And because that is our history, I argue that we need a critical love. We need a kind of love for each other and for justice that sets the world ablaze, but in a really good way. I argue that we need this critical love that is predicated on a profound ethical commitment to caring for the communities that we work in. We need the type of love that Paulo Freire talks about when he says, "It is impossible to teach without the courage to try 1,000 times before giving up." I think a lot about the Freedom School's volunteers. In short, it is impossible to teach without a forged, invented, and well thought out capacity to love. And I argue that love, the love that we have for each other, the love that we have for justice, I argue that it is costly, but it brings about change and the reproduction of change that we need. So in this next video, I just want you to really sit back and take in the idea of love and what the power of love can do to eradicate the hate that we're all swimming in. I think.
What if Martin didn't stand up? What if Rosa didn't sit down? What if Malcolm didn't man up? Where would we be now? What if Marley didn't get up, stand up? What if Du Bois didn't come to advance us? And Mandela didn't come to teach us? Where would we be now? We are the ones we've been waiting for. We can change the world. We can change the world with our love, 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 love. 'Cause it is up to we are the ones we've been waiting for. We can change the world. Our love can change the world. We can change the world with our love, 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 love. Our love can change the world. What if Maya didn't speak out? What if Langston Hughes didn't write it down? What if Josephine Baker didn't dance it out? No. Tell me, where would we be now? What if Sojourner never told the truth? Or Ida B. Wells never printed the news? Harriet never went underground. Where would we be now? We are the ones we've been waiting for. We can change the world. We can change the world with our love, 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 love. 'Cause it is up to we are the ones we've been waiting for. We can change the world. Our love can change the world. We can change the world with our love, 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 love. Our love can change the world. Me too, I matter, you matter, we matter. Together we are love. Me too, I matter, you matter, we matter. Together we are love. It's gotta be all of us to stand up and speak out with all of our love. Love, 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 love. 'Cause it is up to we are the ones we've been waiting for. We can change the world. Our love will change the world. We will change the world with our love, 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 love. Our love will change the world. Oprah, Kamala, Ava, Tarana, and Lena, Serena, Viola, Oprah, Patrice, and Alicia. You and me are the chosen. Right now, this is our moment. We are a people of motion. Our love's gonna change the world.
So we know that there is a lot of injustice in our world. I want to have this moment now that you talk to 2 or 3 people or one person next to you. And I want you to talk about the love that you are willing to display to bring about change. What are you willing to do? How deeply do you love justice? What are you willing to do to be, as Patricia Williams and Bettina Love would say, be a co-conspirator? An ally knows the language, an ally has read the reports, an ally often gives money to the movement, and that's important. But a co-conspirator understands that there is skin in the game, that there is something that they are willing to give up and to do that goes beyond allyship to bring about a different kind of world. So I want you to talk to a person next to you or two people. How much do you love justice enough, and what are you willing to do to change the world? Let's talk for about 5 minutes, and I'll bring us back. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. If we can come back together. And what I'd love to do is have maybe one or two comments before we move on. I'm always aware of folks up in the balcony. Hello, people. Good to see you. So if we can have a comment from up here and a comment from down here and maybe in the back, a very brief comment. What bubbled up in your conversation? What are you willing to do, or was your partner willing to talk about doing in the name of love to change the world? Someone in the top, please. Don't be afraid. Yes? Are you waving to me, or you want to say something? Or both? Oh, you're waving to a friend. Okay. Friend, did you see the wave? Okay. So how about in this area? What did we talk about? What bubbled up in terms of love and what we're willing to do? Yes, thank you. Hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Those of us in education have a real rich tool, but there comes a big responsibility with that. I mean, so we can talk about civility, but if everything we do on a day-to-day basis doesn't show civil behavior, even on a tiny scale, and it doesn't have to be some big grandiose exhibition,
Right.
Realizing that students will learn more from what's not in the syllabus and what's not in the books they read, and but they'll learn more than that by watching what their role models do. So it's a growing thing that you commit to over time. You have to be willing to be a little uncomfortable, but the discomfort in any given time doesn't have to be so big that it feels unliftable. So I think it's a constant conversation with yourself.
Yes.
About how you are always seeing forward motion, you're always seeing an extra ripple and taking advantage of an extra opportunity, many times to be self-critical about, even if you think you're right, to start the conversation with something in your hand as opposed to an empty hand and say, what are you going to give me? What am I going to bring to this?
That's right. Beautiful, thank you. Self as text. One more comment. Yes, we can clap. I saw that. That was kind. Yes. One more comment. Yes.
We talked about communication and the fact that as professors and administration, we have a very frequent and regular and easy flow of information coming to us. But how do we communicate, and how does the information get out to the rest of the community on a more timely basis in order for us to be able to share these kinds of emotional and important messages? And taking this back in terms of how we communicate going forward, and what change can we make in the way we communicate as a community?
Thank you. Beautiful. What you both said is, I want to bring Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's words into the room, but also talk a little bit quickly about this idea of the archaeology of the self, right? And that deep self-excavation that has to happen. And we were just briefly talking, saying that everything that we saw throughout history, right, what people resisted against and what people were pushing for is a collective of individuals. So if individuals were to do that deep self-work, and when they go into rooms where they're creating policies for or against something, we would have a different kind of world if they came to understand the pain that is associated, the marginalization that causes others. And that's another conversation, right, that we'll talk about, you know, power and really what often motivates the evil that we see in the world, right? This desire for power and for money and for status. But it's that individual work that each of us have to do as students, as staff, as administrators, as professors, as people in the world. But I want us to remember that when we talk about love, it is not this, oh, I love you. While that type of love is important, but Reverend Dr. King talks about love that has power to it, that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So again, showing you this framework again that I am working on towards racial literacy development, a big piece of it is the archaeology of the self. And what this means is that as individuals, we make up a collective, but we must do the self-work. We must dig deep to excavate as it relates to justice, where issues of bias and racism and other phobias live within us. We must perform a deep excavation and exploration of beliefs, of biases and ideas that shape the way that we engage with our work and with the world. And this kind of archaeological dig is a method that can serve beyond the understanding of our moral consciousness as it relates to justice, but it can also be used in our lives in other ways. And I have discovered this power, the power of this dig as it relates to love. And here is my artifact of my archaeological dig around love and intimacy. So exploring all forms of love, love for my people, love for justice, and ultimately love for a partner makes me a more grounded and well-rounded person. And indeed, I imagine that the videos that we've seen, those folks loved themselves, they loved their children, their people, they even loved generations of people that they would never meet. They loved them enough to be co-conspirators and activists and to put themselves on the line and to lose their lives. And so I'm sure it is love that kept them going, love of a reimagined future, and love that they received from others. And so here's my opportunity to share with you. This was a project that brought incredible healing for me. And for those of you who are savvy with QR codes, if you point your phone to the little vortex in the middle, it will take you to a page that will tell you more about it. And so I share that with you, not as a way to try to sell books, or I'm doing a tour, I'm doing all that stuff that we do, but as a way to be open and honest that this work that I do around justice and advocacy is personal as well as it is professional. And the idea of doing an archaeology of the self around the ways that we want the world to be different, it really has to start with ourselves and all the things within our lives, including the desire for love and the way that we give love. So I would like to end at this point with a quote from goddess and educator Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks said, as she echoed the work of Erich Fromm, he defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Explaining further, he continues, love is as love does. Love is an act of wills, both intention and action. Thank you. Enjoy the ceremonies that you have here. Thank you to Ron Milan for putting together an incredible, incredible program, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming. I'm especially happy that the students are here. Thank you for coming. I just want to say a couple of things real quick. Remember, we have to make a change, and that change involves love. So make sure that you register and vote. Okay? The Black Student Union created, with some help from other collaborators, an unbelievable exhibit in the gallery. I can't say enough about it. Go see it. It's unbelievable. Love it because they put all their love into it. And going back to Yolanda, thank you so much for your talk. We love you here at FIT. This is your second time here, and you're almost a part of us, so watch out, we might keep you here, all right? Thank you so much, enjoy your day, and please participate in the activities during Black History Month. Thank you.